Hello, and welcome to the Feet on the Soil podcast, the podcast about the world beneath our feet and how we interact with it. After a brief little 2-week break, we're back. First of all, thank you to everybody for sticking around while I kind of readjust to college and work life and social life, and also feet on soil stuff. It's been a little bit stressful, but I think I've got it figured out now. The last 2 weeks, while I haven't been making the podcast, there's been a lot going on in my own life with Feet on the Soil. We had our first live event in collaboration with Spun Out at the Earth Rising Festival in Imma, and that was a fantastic experience. It was amazing to not just kind of speak about these issues and have people here over the internet, but to actually see them listening and to hear their feedback in real time was a completely different experience. It was fascinating to talk to people about climate change and how Ireland is doing in the fight against climate change, which, spoiler, isn't very good. It was fascinating to hear both people's feedback, but to also see it visually. The event was organised by Spun Out, and what happened was I gave a talk about climate change and habitat in Ireland, and people had this huge amount of recycled newspaper clippings or magazine images, and they created collages out of them to represent how they felt while they heard the talk. At the end, a photo was taken of each of the images, and everything was put together as a kind of mega collage, and you can see it over on Spun Out's Instagram. It's really fascinating to see what people picked up on and what people really care about. Also, if you've been following me on Instagram, you might have saw that I got to interview one of my heroes, really, Dermot Gavin, who was really the person who got me into gardening and in turn into environmental stuff. I spent a lot of my time during COVID listening to him talk with Paul Smith on the Dirt podcast. Through an opportunity with my work, I got to interview him for a new project that you might see on the horizon soon, but it was an amazing experience. Dermot was an absolute gent. He was such a nice guy, and it was just a fantastic experience. So while I haven't been making podcasts, stuff has still been happening in the background. But back to the podcast itself. This week we have a guest who I've been watching for a long time and really think is an underrated gem in the world of foraging content. His name online is Fieldstudy, and he creates videos about plant identification, a lot of mycology, and even how to create beautiful food dishes out of what you forage. Joseph, also known as Fieldstudy, was kind enough to join me on a Zoom call from his home on the Isle of Wight, where he teaches foraging classes, works as a brewer, and all around is just one of these people who's so in touch with nature. It's just fantastic to hear him speak. We had a great conversation. I really enjoyed talking with Joseph, and we covered some stuff that I really didn't plan for. We went really into his career as a brewer. We talked a lot about the Isle of Wight and its unique ecosystem. And there was so much more I could have asked him about, but I think the content of this episode is so valuable. Joseph's knowledge, but also his kind of respect for the landscape, really shines through in the way he speaks about it. And I really hope that more people head over to his channel and subscribe, because what you don't get from the podcast is just how visually stunning his YouTube videos are. He talks a little bit about it in this episode, but he studied film and wanted to be a documentary filmmaker. And you can see it in his videos. While you're so enamored with the landscapes and the beautiful shots of his videos, you don't even realize you're learning about mushroom identification and how incredible foraging can be. It's really good stuff. And I recommend everybody, even before you listen, head over to Fieldstudy on YouTube and Instagram, give him a follow, come back and enjoy this conversation with Fieldstudy.
So I have always foraged for stuff. So I was quite lucky in the fact that my parents brought me up in the scouting movement. And there was always little bits of all of the sort of survival handbooks that I was obsessed with when I was a kid, which was about foraging for wild food, for plants, for fungi. And that was the bit that I was drawn to more than axes and chopping wood and making shelter and all of that. I like the plant side of things. So I was drawn to that, and my dad had limited knowledge. My family comes from London. They're city folk, really, but he had a curiosity for the natural landscape, and he gifted that to me, and that's when I started foraging. So basic stuff at the beginning, so nettles and hawthorn leaves and stuff like that. And then over the years, I think I've just added to the knowledge and let my curiosity lead me to where I am now.
And where you are now is a pretty interesting thing. You say that your parents left the kind of hustle and bustle of city life to give you that more connected upbringing in a fairly unique place, being the Isle of Wight. The Isle of Wight is sometimes described as England in miniature, just because of the diversity of habitats. And I wonder how this kind of diversity of habitats and this diversity of plant life has affected your experience with foraging. Is that something you'd like to go into a bit more?
So we came to you're right, it is England in miniature. There's all sorts of small habitats from an ecological point of view, and also you've got towns, you've got proper remote parts as well, places that feel wild, so you can walk for 10 miles and see 3 different things. So I was quite lucky growing up here in that respect. But we came here in 1997, I think. I was 6 years old, and my parents wanted to move me out of the city to give me that thing that they had to travel to get when they were younger. From a working class background, my dad especially, he used to leave the city when scouts used to take him out on scout camp. And he fell in love with the natural landscape. So he always said that he wanted to move either to the countryside or to the seaside. So then he found the Isle of Wight, and it was both of those things rolled into one. So he moved us down here, uprooted absolutely everything, left their sort of family, moved into a dilapidated Victorian house where the windows used to freeze over in the winter, and we just got on with it. And everything I know, everything I am, everything I teach is sort of a product of that decision, that he wanted me to have a less urban upbringing, and I'm very grateful to him for that. But yeah, that's how we came to be here. It is a very special place, you're right. We're surrounded by sea, we've got rocky coastline, sandy beaches, we've got sand dunes, coniferous woodland, chalk downland, everything. So if you're into botany, if you're into conservation, if you're into wildlife, anything like that, it's really the place to be. Yeah, it's really cool.
And like you say, you could be interested in botany or conservation and find something on the Isle of Wight, but what you're really interested in is the foraging aspect.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just thinking, does the fact that you've kind of grown up in such a unique area have the sort of the people around you or the kind of real nature value of the area around you, have they kind of impacted your journey toward foraging?
I think so. There was still a culture here of foraging for certain parts of your food. I think it exists in lots of different places around the UK, where in really rural parts they cling on to the knowledge, or the knowledge doesn't get eroded as quickly. You know what I mean? So yeah, we moved here. There were still people in the village foraging for mushrooms and all of that sort of stuff. It took me a long time to get to it, you know what I mean? As a boy born in Croydon, it took me a long time to sort of get round to learning everything in its entirety. But it was always here. And I think foraging was, especially when I started Fieldstudy, when I started the YouTube channel, it was a way for me to teach people about the things I saw, the things I felt in the landscape that was direct, because there's nothing more direct than eating the landscape that you're in. It is immediately nourishing and, yeah, in many ways, but it is the most direct way that you can teach someone about the landscape around them. And as soon as they know more about it, the more that they respect it. And that was my thinking. I could have come at it from many different angles, but I chose food. It's always been a passion of mine anyway, but it seemed the best way to teach people about plants, because people that don't know much about plants or don't care about plant morphology, mycology, any of this sort of stuff, what they do care about is something delicious being served up to them. You know what I mean? You can get an immediate dopamine response. You can make people happy, and then they'll remember the things. So that's why Fieldstudy came to be. And I'd tried it in lots of different guises elsewhere in the country. So when I lived down in Sussex, in a town called Lewes, I sort of did photography projects on tracking and plant identification and all of this sort of stuff. But it just didn't make sense, because it didn't make sense until I moved back to the island a few years ago, because this is the place where I'm from. I was teaching the knowledge elsewhere, but it didn't make sense unless I was here, in the landscape that I learned all the things in. So I'm very lucky in the fact that I can walk about half a mile from my house now and be at the ash tree that my dad first told me what an ash tree was. You know what I mean? It's still there, and I can walk around in my memory in that way, and therefore it's easier to teach. I think home is a potent thing.
I love that sentiment. And I mean, it's something that we've definitely explored a lot on the podcast, that kind of, you're always going to feel that connection with nature on a broader sense, but that connection to the nature of your local area, your home, is always going to be that little bit different, that little bit stronger, wherever that home may be. And I think whether it was during COVID or it was all building up before COVID, you kind of saw this explosion of foraging media. So books, there's now full, like, you walk into a bookshop and there's a whole foraging section, but also, you know, YouTube, like yourself, and other channels like Seth Hughes and stuff. You've got TikTok, like, I don't know about you, my TikTok For You page and my YouTube recommends are just full of foraging content. And I think that this has kind of motivated people to get out there and have an experience with these things.
Mm-hmm.
And I know from interviewing nature education guides and being a nature education guide myself, that the kind of food element of things is really powerful. You show a kid a hazel tree and you say, this produces nuts that are used to make the Nutella that you put in your toast or your pancakes, and they have a really real reaction to it. And do you find that now that people are getting more interested, I know you're doing foraging walks, and
Yeah, I am.
do you find that people, when they have that interactive experience with nature, that they kind of develop a stronger connection with it?
Yeah, it's interesting what you're saying about teaching it to children as well. I did a foraging walk the other weekend, and there was a bunch of children there as well. And I got them to try raw stinging nettle leaves. And as soon as they got over the fear, it was one of the most amazing things. Now, in my head, I think that's brilliant, because I've made the children eat a green thing that's from the wild and they've got a connection to it. But I don't know, just the amount of happiness and the sort of shedding of apprehension was really good to see. But yeah, I do find that a lot. You really see an immediate reaction with certain plants. Like, one of my favourite plants to teach people is water pepper, Persicaria hydropiper, and it's spicy. So it's used a lot in Japanese cuisine. They make dipping sauces and stuff with it. But as soon as you start chewing it, your enzymes release a chemical, and that creates this heat in your mouth, and it is intensely peppery. And people that really like spice, like me, love it. I showed it to a guy at work, and he went back to the same woodland like every day for a week just to get more. I was like, you probably need to leave that patch alone now. But yeah, it was, I love having that, seeing people have that immediate reaction and seeing those neurological pathways just open up. It's a joyous thing. I think it always has been as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I mean, like, foraging to me feels like one of these incredibly innate experiences. I talked about it in a previous episode about seasons, and how foraging kind of, sometimes I almost imagine that I'm like a caveman out browsing on a hedge. A bit weird, but I don't know. And I think I've felt it and I've seen it. There's been this enormous resurgence in foraging, whether that be through books, like I said, there's whole sections in bookshops now just about foraging, which is amazing, but also through social media, so people like yourself, and then on TikTok and short form content and all of this. And I really love to see it, because I think that foraging is this really, really important way of reconnecting with nature. And like, it's a bit of a silly kind of question to ask a foraging content creator, but have you seen this resurgence in foraging, and do you think that social media is important in its kind of resurgence?
I do, and I see it daily. And that's a fantastic thing, because it's something that I took for granted until I moved away and talked to people that grew up in different environments to me. But yeah, it certainly has had a resurgence since the lockdown especially, or at least the resurgence on social media. And it's a good thing, I think. It's something deeply human. You're basically witnessing a lot of human beings realising that they're human beings and going out and doing a human being thing, which is lovely. It's just, I guess there are things which are just foraging for aesthetics, so you get people posing with mushrooms and stuff, but there's always going to be a certain amount of human ego that creeps into it. But for every one of them you see, there are 20 or 30 people that have taken their kids out foraging, that have gone out foraging with their partners and just had a really good time doing something that is meant to feel good. Because when you gather resources, it's meant to feel good. Because if it didn't feel good, we'd stop gathering resources and we wouldn't be a successful species. We probably would have died out years ago. But yeah, so finding people that are finding out that it feels good to have a connection with the natural landscape and gather resources to eat and to present to people, and the social aspect that goes along with it is good. But yeah, you're right, there's loads of books coming out at the moment as well. In fact, this week, you know Danny in the Wild? She does allotment stuff and loads of foraging things. She just released a book today on the day of recording this. It's called The Forager's Almanac by Danielle Gallagher. And yeah, it looks incredible. I'm going to get a copy at the weekend. I think it's available in Waterstones. But yeah, so there are loads of good books coming out and people exploring it in different ways. I'm really, I don't know, when I grew up there was, like I say, it was always a subsection in survival manuals, and that's how I sort of came to it. But then, I don't know, you might find this as well, when you've spent enough time outside, you don't see the outside world as a threat. It's not the monster that you have to overcome. It's not you versus it, like in all of the sort of Bear Grylls Discovery Channel things. It just becomes normal. So seeing the literature go from that to, you know, this is a wholesome thing that you can do with your family. This is something that will make you feel better mentally, physically, everything. Is a fantastic thing, and I love witnessing it. I'm so glad I got to be around at the time where people started going back to the land. It's a good thing.
It is. It definitely is. I think something you touched on there that I think is super important is that community aspect. So when I got interested in foraging, it was about 2 or 3 years ago, and myself and my girlfriend found a YouTube channel. Called The Foraging Gardener.
Yeah.
And
she's fantastic. Yeah, I have a lot of time for everything she puts out. You can just get lost in it. Yeah, an amazing insight into her world. Yeah, fascinating.
Yeah, she's amazing. And her content just really motivated us to get out and try and find what's in our kind of local area. So we started going to parks and grasslands and just green spaces around, and because of that we built up a connection with these places. So we're able to walk around now and go, oh, there's going to be elderberries there in a few weeks, or we know that puffballs grow in that location and there's a huge amount of turkey tails on that log every year, and you kind of just build up a closer connection to both the person you're foraging with and to the location. And I think that's super important, because I think foraging has this kind of, not stereotype, but this idea to it that it's one person going out who's kind of strange and they have a basket and they go out and collect some weird mushrooms in a field. But
yeah,
it's not about that. It's about the kind of the community aspect. And one thing that I think kind of really exemplifies that is the live streams that you do, the Friday live streams, where you kind of go out and forage and allow people to have this almost like virtual foraging experience. And I was just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that.
Well, the live stream sort of came about because I was sort of bored in the winter, you know, where the nights are sort of drawing in. And I thought I just really want to talk to people about foraging. So what better thing to do than to go online? It was every Friday at the beginning, and we've sort of switched and changed over time. But what we do is every week we sort of meet before the weekend, and people can ask questions about foraging, about the things that they're going to go and look for over the weekend. And we just sort of get inspired. We chat recipes, we go off on tangents and all of that sort of thing, because it's just a joy to be around other people that are enthusiastic about the landscape and particularly wild food. And there are some fantastic people that join in every week. Some of them much better experts than I am. They are always there to answer people's questions. So you get beginners that come along and they can have their questions answered immediately, either by me or in the chat, which is lovely. And yeah, I love it. It's and then I started taking them outdoors, as it were, and sort of live streaming from the countryside, and that got an excellent response from people that couldn't go out into the countryside themselves, so they were sort of foraging and learning by proxy. They're sort of watching on the internet and then hopefully taking that into their daily practice. But yeah, they could ask questions of the plants that I was pointing at immediately, so it was almost like going on a walk with a professional foraging tutor, because that is the best thing that you can do if you want to learn how to forage for edible plants, is actually go in person. So the second best thing I figured was to sort of invite the people into my phone and try and answer all the questions as they're sort of scrolling up and down the screen. It's difficult, to say the least, sometimes, but it's really rewarding. In fact, some of the people that join in on the live streams, I don't know, they feel like friends, you know what I mean? I look forward to chatting to them every week. It is interesting. We would have probably foraged as communities throughout all of human history, and where it can be quite a niche subject, especially for people that aren't exposed to, the things that I was exposed to growing up, so like hiking, walking, all of this stuff, who want to get involved. It is important to have people there to sort of go along with you. You always know that there's someone beside you if you've chatted about it, so it doesn't feel quite as daunting. And I think lots of the people that join in were probably foraging or foraging alone, or didn't have big communities of people that already did it around them. So then the live stream's just a way of feeling like you're part of a wider community. Yeah. And I think that's quite important. It's become quite important for my foraging practice, because after about 12 hours worth of editing, then jumping on a live stream with lots of people that are enthusiastic for the videos is quite important to keep me enthused.
I think the live stream that you do, it's so important. Like you said, you've kind of built this community, and people are making connections there, but also it's making foraging just that bit more accessible. So if you're in an area where maybe you have to travel out to your local park or anything like that, it means that once a week you have this chance to get a bit of information from someone who's really done their research, to get involved with the community, and just to enjoy kind of the outdoors. But I don't want to be putting words into your mouth, but I think your real passion and drive is in that long form content. And there's a lot of content out there about foraging, and I think sometimes the content can be foraging's own worst enemy almost. And to see something like what you're making, which is such high quality and so clearly heavily researched and informative, is really amazing. And I just wonder, what was it that motivated you to make that kind of decision to go into content creation, to go into education, and to choose YouTube as your kind of medium?
Yeah, no, I agree. The long form videos are the sole reason that I wanted to do Fieldstudy in its current sort of configuration. My background, just to have a brief little history, is I studied film production. I always wanted to be a documentary filmmaker and make sort of cinema verite, like direct cinema, observational documentaries. And throughout my life, I've started lots of projects, and they never sort of came to fruition. So then I became a photographer, and I've had a very long history with photography. I worked for a photographic company for a long period of time, and absolutely loved working there. So then it just felt the right way to present the information was to film things that I would be proud to project onto a big screen. Because I've tried, you're right, content creation is a thing in the foraging community. It is also its own beast because it is hard to keep up with demand when you're working on the sort of pace and time frame of trees and mushrooms, because they don't always play by the rules, if you know what I mean. I can walk from my house about 5 miles to a foraging spot where I think there are going to be mushrooms and there isn't any mushrooms. So then that's a half a day wasted. But yeah, I wanted it to be something I'd be proud to project onto a big screen. And because of that, I take my time over it. I want it to be as accurate to my experience of the place that I live in, that I love, that I grew up in, as possible. And yeah, so I spend a lot of time not filming. That's important for my process. I sit, I look at things, I don't talk. Because I would love to, and this is going to sound weird because you've watched all of my videos probably, I would rather not be in front of the camera. If I knew a forager that I could make a documentary about, it would be about them. But I didn't have that luxury. So I had to teach myself to sort of present and do all of that sort of stuff. And I guess it's like, I don't know, 1/3 Jack Hargreaves, who was a TV presenter from the 1970s that I'm obsessed with, part Hugh Fearnley-Whittinstall and part Jamie Oliver. That's sort of, I found the mix. But I had to teach myself to do it. It didn't come naturally because usually I'm behind the camera getting all of the framing right. But yeah, I don't know. People seem to like it and I'm glad they do. So yeah, that's the sort of story about how I came to make long form videos. And I wish I could do even longer form videos, you know, like 90-minute long, sort of epic. Yeah, but I don't know if there's a market for that at the moment.
Well, I'll tell you, first of all, there's definitely a market. I'd happily sit down and watch a 90-minute field study video. I would be delighted. I'm putting it on my calendar. I'm expecting one to be coming up.
Okay. No, you're all that matters, man. I'll get working on it tomorrow.
Like you said, you're dealing with a lot of variables when it comes to your content. You can't always rely on a mushroom to be where you thought it was. But at the moment, when I look out my window and it's about 8 o'clock and it's pitch black out and the rain is hammering into the side of my window, I see one of the biggest variabilities, and that is the seasons. And I was wondering, how do the seasons impact your foraging? And a bit of a loaded question, but what is your favourite season for foraging?
We're currently in my favourite season. I'm very excited that this storm's blown in. But yeah, as you can imagine, it means lots of things for an amateur mycologist like myself. I like mushrooms. This is when there's the most mushrooms around. But yeah, the winter does sort of change your foraging practice. But I think there's a misconception that the natural world dies during the winter. That's not the truth. You can always find sort of pockets of life, of good things to eat, good things to do elsewhere. And yeah, so I carry on all the way through the winter. It's impossible not to, because you just get, you know, if anything, there's just more time to read and research in the evenings, you know what I mean? But yeah, I also look to other things during the winter. So not just foraging for food. The winter time was a time for making things and taking stock, like historically. So I do things like I make string, I cook more. I add to my ever-growing rack of fermenting things, which is always on my shelf down at Fieldstudy HQ, which is what I call my garage. But yeah, so at the moment I am trying to become a better willow weaver. So I'm currently trying to work out how the willow lobster pots that used to be used off of the Isle of Wight were woven. And that is something that occupies my winter evenings. So foraging continues, it just changes form. And sometimes it takes, it doesn't always have to be about food.
Yeah, that's, I'm very interested in the willow lobster baskets now. That's really, really cool. And actually, it's a little bit unrelated, but one question I wanted to ask, and it's because I've had this experience, so I want to know if you've had any. Have you ever had an experience where you've been out foraging and you've found something completely unexpected, whether that be like a man-made thing that you never knew about, or even a plant that maybe doesn't really belong where it is?
Yeah, no, I don't know. Part of foraging for me is that serendipity. It's opening yourself up to being surprised. But yeah, I've found mushrooms that aren't meant to grow this far south. That in all of the books they'll tell you that it won't grow anywhere below sort of York. Found them, proved it wrong, put it on the scientific record.
Damn, that's pretty cool.
But yeah, no, all sorts of stuff. There's always surprised by the sort of man-made litter that I find in hedges. There's always something strange going on. But yeah, best not to get into that. I don't know. It is the surprise of finding things, especially out of season, out of context. It's good. Some of my best mushroom finds have been on the edge of like council car parks and, you know, just outside Aldi and things. So as soon as you have the knowledge, you can be surprised on an industrial estate. And that's a fantastic gift to give yourself, because there's nothing else in these places that warrants your interest. So if you find something potentially delicious on the wood chip around a tree outside your local Aldi, that's amazing. You've saved yourself six quid on dried mushrooms. But yeah, I don't know, it is an important thing to read the guidebooks, but not always they're sort of guidelines to not habitat so much, but seasonality. So you can find things out of context, out of season, and it is having enough information to be able to use that to make a positive identification, I think, that is key to it. And foraging is a discipline, and like all disciplines, it does take work. There are things that can be gained easily, plant species that can be gained really easily, and we learn them from childhood. And there are ones that take maybe 3-5 years of meeting the plant or the fungi in the wild and identifying it, and loads of things that I now consider good edible things have taken me years and years to get comfortable with actually eating and consuming. So you've always got to make sure that you are really on the ball with identification before you even think about, you know, putting it into your diet.
Yeah.
Is what I'm saying. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I love what you were saying there about finding something in an industrial estate, because I think this is something really important. Because, like you were saying with the live streams, like some people don't have the same access to nature as others. Like I'm lucky enough to live just at the foot of the Wicklow Mountains. You're lucky enough to live in the Isle of Wight. Some people, it might be a half an hour drive to get to something like that. But I was with my college, and we were doing a field study. We were doing a field study in the Irish Modern Art Museum, which is in an old building that it was called the Royal Hospital Kilmainham, and it's in the middle of the town centre. It's not exactly what you would call a nature reserve by any stretch, but we found what was the first example of a certain moss on the wall of the car park to be found in Dublin ever.
Amazing.
And it was because there was a corrugated iron roof above it, and this moss thrives in like high mineral content areas. And this was like literally in a car
Wow.
park, middle of town, like nothing especially interesting about it.
amazing.
But because we had the knowledge, we were able to identify this and have this amazing nature experience. And I think that's something really important. And it's why I wanted to ask you as well. I saw on your Instagram today that you had shared that I think it was 3 people have been hospitalized in the UK because they had consumed death caps because they had wrongfully identified them. And like you said,
Yeah.
the content around foraging can be its own worst enemy. A lot of people will watch a video about mushroom hunting and they'll just go out and do it. One thing I really like is that in the description of all your YouTube videos, you also give resources that can help you with learning more about identification. How important for you is the kind of the research before the foraging?
Yeah, it's incredibly important. The research is about 90% of it for me. You're right. The sort of the proliferation of foraging content on the internet can be its own worst enemy because of the sort of rise of short form media. because identifying something and having a relationship with a plant enough to eat it is not a short form process. It's something that takes work, and work can be fun, by the way, but it takes work. The most of my foraging career, life, whatever you want to call it, has been spent going out and identifying mushrooms and plants individually and getting to know them. One of my plant teachers, a guy called Robin Harford from eatweeds.co.uk, he used to have this saying, which was, thinking can get you killed, which is, if you say I think to any of the sort of identification things, like I think, I think the gills on that are this colour, I think it smells like this, all of these things that we use as tools to identify edible plants, then that uncertainty is what gets you killed or hospitalises you, unfortunately. And there was a case of it here on the Isle of Wight. Really, really sadly, the woman died. I think she was from the Far East somewhere. I'm not too sure where. But she'd come over to a place called Ventnor Botanic Gardens, and she recognised a mushroom that was growing under one of the trees, as it looked like something that she knew growing up. And as we know, mushrooms are not universal, so they will grow in different parts of the world, and it wasn't the same mushroom. It turns out what she ate was Amanita phalloides, the death cap mushroom, and she subsequently died, leaving behind her family. So that story is really prevalent down here on the island because so many people knew her, worked with her, all this sort of stuff. It's here within the community. So I teach it to people when they ask about how important it is, or especially if people show signs of letting their ego do the talking. So you'll find when people start to learn about something, they will jump 2 steps ahead, and it is a good technique for learning certain things, but you can't do it when it comes to identifying plants that you're going to then eat or fungi that you're then going to eat. As soon as someone acts blasé and says, oh, it'll be all right, or that one looks tasty or edible, you then have to remind them of the severity of what they're saying can actually mean. And foraging shouldn't be a scary thing. It's something that all human beings have done forever. However, the information, it used to be taught from an early age, and we're in a space now where people are not taught it from an early age, so they can, put too much of their self in the way, or, to save face, sometimes they'll say a thing is a thing when it isn't. And it's just sort of really important to erode that. You open yourself up to being wrong. You learn it as a discipline, almost methodically, like it's a flowchart, a tick list of things in order to learn a species. And then you can keep yourself safe. Like I always say on my videos, knowledge will keep you safe. So you can never have too much knowledge. You can always get more knowledge. So the more knowledge you have, the safer you become. So if you are at all apprehensive, there's always knowledge out there that you can gather, consume, imbibe, all of this sort of stuff in order to keep yourself safe. Like I say, there are loads of resources out there, books. You can buy courses, you can go out there and forage with any number of people in any number of counties, anywhere in the world now because of its popularity. And I really cannot stress how important that is. And it's a fun thing to do as well.
Knowledge will keep you safe, and thinking will get you killed. That's the 2 important things to keep in mind.
Yeah, I don't know. The thinking can get you killed one without explanation can sound a bit counterintuitive, but But I don't know. Yeah, there's important to have these sort of maxims and stuff to remind yourself when you're out there, because when you're very excited, when you think you found something, you can make mistakes. And like anyone can, because we're all human at the end of the day. I don't know. It's important to keep all of this stuff in mind. Not let it impact your enjoyment of the thing, but let it be the sort of warning that keeps you from straying too far.
Absolutely. And I mean, are there kind of any, maybe your top 3 recommendations as like the first things that people should learn, kind of to make that flowchart you were saying about, to learn that identification key? What would be the 3 that you would recommend to people?
Yes, I think there is one which always I bring up on every single one of my courses. I teach it on loads of my videos, and that is the stinging nettle. And it is boring, don't get me wrong, because it is a domestic plant in the fact that it grows everywhere that there is human habitation, pretty much in the temperate zones around the world. But because of that, we have always eaten it, and it is highly nutritious for us. And also it has stinging hairs to stop you picking it. You know what I mean? That is how much we've put pressure on that plant. It's evolved stinging hairs, so then
To get rid of this.
But yeah, learn the stinging nettle, but don't just learn the stinging nettle because you think you know it already. If you look at a stinging nettle and sort of work out the way the leaves fall, what makes a stinging nettle look like a stinging nettle? So the leaf shape, the way they fall on the stem, its habit, the way that it grows, where it grows. Once you've answered all of these questions for yourself, and they're things that you'll know already innately because you've experienced stinging nettles throughout most of your life, most likely, then you can start to look in books or start to listen to foragers talk about when they're talking about identification features and be like, okay, so pairs of opposite leaves running up the stem, you know, all of this sort of thing. So the second plant that I'd probably recommend is the daisy as well, because that is one that we spend hours playing with as kids, and there's a fascination with them. And I don't think people understand why, but it's probably because it is okay to eat, you know what I mean? Once you have a relationship with the common daisy, then, you know, you can add it into your diet, put it in a salad, go wild. That's the second plant that I'd probably recommend. But again, take pictures of it. Everyone's got a smartphone now. Take picture of it from different angles. And yeah, just learn it and enjoy the process. Enjoy laying on your belly on a, you know, in a park and getting up close and just looking at the plant. Don't be bothered about the information. Just try and work out the shapes that make it and all of this sort of stuff, because your brain is meant to recognize things. It is a recognition engine. It just takes your attention, and it's important to know when to apply your attention, I think. In a world where it's been sort of robbed from us, it's important to know when to apply it, maintain it. And you wanted 3 plants, didn't you? I'm not too sure.
If it's a top 2, it's a top 2.
Stinging nettles and daisies. For absolute beginners that have maybe never even considered eating any sort of plant, those are the 2 that I would probably recommend. Oh, and dandelions as well, because everyone likes to make that dandelion honey stuff that you can make in the spring and summer. But also the leaves are really, really good for you. They're quite bitter, but that bitterness is something that you're going to need to get used to if you want to forage for lots of the plants about. And it's really, really good for you. There's some research been done into bitter compounds, and they actually turn out to be quite good for the gut microbiome and also your body's ability to regulate things like insulin and sugar levels and all of that sort of stuff. So yeah, dandelion's a good friend to know as well. So yeah, go out there and identify them 3 things, and then just build it. A plant a week, a plant a month, a plant every 2 years. If you can forage for 5 things, you know, you can improve any walk, any trip to the supermarket, any, you know, mundane life experience can be enriched just by knowing a few of the plants that are around you.
I've kind of been doing that where I'm learning as a kind of a staircase. So I've started off with just like blackberries. Like everybody knows blackberries when you're out on a walk. You pick them as a kid and you eat them.
Yeah.
And that was kind of my base. And then I built up, I started picking elderberries a lot. And that was again a kind of another stair. And then it was rose hips, and then it was primroses, and then it was nettles. And it's just the more you know. And like you said, it makes a simple walk through the park so much more exciting when you're able to look at a hedgerow, which at one point might have just looked like a green wall to you, and all of a sudden it becomes this mosaic of 100 plant species, and you're just enamored by it, and all you want to do is learn about the one plant that's there that you don't know about. Like even Seth Hughes, who like I'm sure you know Seth Hughes.
Yes.
He did that video where he shows that you can suck the liquid out of the honeysuckle flower.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And I went on a walk the next day. I was like, I'm gonna do that. I've never done that before. I have to try that.
Yeah, no, Seth's stuff's really good. I really enjoy the things that he puts out, man. Yeah, I've got a lot of time for his honesty. I think it really comes across, and he lets it be known that he is also learning these things as well. So it's even though he's incredibly popular on social media and things, it is almost like having a companion learning with you, I think, for lots of people, because it's I don't know, sometimes when you're teaching someone, you can come across as too much of an expert, which means there's too much of you coming across, I think. And some people can shy away from that. So if you're teaching alongside people, then I think that's a really interesting way of doing it. And he's really managed to capture that with his video content. And I really look forward to seeing what he does next.
Absolutely. And I wanted to ask you the very same thing. So do you have any sort of long-term projects or goals with foraging and then the content that you're making about it? I know I'm expecting a 90-minute video next month. That's on my calendar now. But is there anything that you have kind of planned out, or where do you see field studies in the future?
I would like to make Fieldstudy a sort of a platform, a teaching platform, do more in-person teaching as well. I get a lot out of that. But yeah, maybe team up with a few people to, bring you other foragers' stories. Like I said previously, it wasn't a natural choice for me to be in front of the camera. And I know a lot of foragers out there that maybe don't have the technology or the skills to present their stories, but they're living as intense lives. The places that they forage are under different pressures than the places that I forage. There are stories there to be told. So I'd really like to take Fieldstudy on the road to tell other people's stories as well as my own, because I feel like that is captivating and important, and I'd really just enjoy doing it, I think. But yeah, so hopefully there's that. I mean, talking of leading courses, I've started doing courses just outside my village here, which is fantastic. We've got a few walks coming up. But then I'm also going up to, we were talking about Danny in the wild earlier. I'm actually teaching on one of her courses, one of her skateboarding retreats at the end of October, which I'm so excited about. So yeah, meeting someone else in the community that also knows how, frustrating it can be to edit a video whilst all you want to do is go out and pick mushrooms will be interesting. So yeah, I'm teaching fermentation there as well. So it isn't just foraging. I'm teaching another one of my sort of passion subjects, which is fermentation. So there'll be some crossover with that as well, which I'm really looking forward to sharing firsthand with people.
The fermentation thing is something like I've watched. I would have said all of your videos, but I was watching a few of them today just to kind of refresh the mind, and I had completely, I don't know how I had glossed over this, but you are a brewer. Like that's your job.
Yeah.
And one thing that like immediately, as soon as I found that out, that I wanted to ask was, has foraging and that kind of knowledge of plants affected the way that you brew?
Yes, in a way. Yeah, the brewing thing was a passion subject before I started doing it professionally. So when I first moved down to the island, I was actually a labourer. I was a builder for a year, which again is not a natural thing for me to do. But an opportunity came up at a craft brewery, and something that I do in my own time is I've always been a winemaker and a cider maker. Again, it's one of these immediate experiences that if you hand someone a delicious glass of booze that they can't get from anywhere else, there's an immediate sort of happiness. It's nice to be able to share that with someone. So that was my way into brewing, and specifically sort of like alcohol fermentation and things. And through that, and through my love of the landscape, I then took that into a more sciencey route, and I got obsessed with wild yeast and sort of cultivating wild yeast strains from the local terroir, like the local landscape. So finding new and interesting yeast strains and singling them out. Yeah, and I brew a lot with wild products as well. So I make like a feral apple cider every year. I make a crab apple cider every year, which used to be called pig squeal cider. In England, at least, that was the name for it because it's intensely sour and quite tannic, which is how I quite like cider like that, you know, with a sort of real dryness to it.
Yeah.
None of this sweet stuff. So I used to make that every year. But yeah, all sorts of stuff going on down in the garage at the moment. Like I've got a pale ale that I have put on top of some dried mugwort to infuse the mugwort flavour into the pale ale. I've got a Chanterelle sour beer, which is just aging, which will be ready probably next year or the year after. But because I was doing all of this at home, I then went into the interview and they weren't expecting to talk to someone who was a yeast geek. So they were like, oh yeah, do you want to come and brew with us? So I stopped the job as the builder's assistant and I went to brew commercially. And it is a completely different beast brewing commercially than brewing in your garage.
I'd say.
I mean, they're not going to let me, you know, use wild yeasts and make a mugwort dream-inducing sour beer on a commercial scale. Unfortunately, maybe there's scope for that somewhere else. But no, we just make reasonable craft beer. But it just keeps my hand in it, you know what I mean? And it does give me a certain opportunity to play within it. But yeah, brewing is one part of fermentation that I've managed to find like a paid job in. And I'm obsessed with hops and trying to grow my own hop species, like hop variant, like a cultivar of hop that is completely my own. So I've been crossing strains of lots of wild hops with cultivated stock and growing them in my garden.
That is so cool,
all sorts of good stuff like that. But yeah, no, other fermentation as well. The thing that I'm teaching up at the course at the end of October is how to make wild fermented fizzy drinks, so a wild soda. So using fruit and syrups and things that you can make with wild and foraged ingredients, you can then make a fizzy drink that is relatively low in sugar, naturally fermented, naturally carbonated, so you're not using carbon dioxide that's a byproduct of the fertilization industry, all of this sort of stuff. And you can do it on your kitchen side at ambient temperature with hardly any equipment, you know, like a jar and an old fizzy water bottle that you might have knocking around. It's as simple as that. So I'm looking forward to teaching that to people. And yeah, fermentation and brewing has just been a thing that I do alongside Fieldstudy that sort of feeds into it. I wanted to have an occupation because everyone needs one to pay the bills, etc. Whilst I was doing the videos that was sort of related, so my attention wouldn't be drawn too far away from the landscape. And I've managed to do that. I work in a beautiful place on the edge of like a bit of oak pastureland, so I can step outside of the brewery doors, even though it's a big, dark, hot agricultural barn, and look out over, you know, oak pastureland. And every now and again I'll be surprised with a mushroom and all of this sort of good stuff. So I'm quite lucky in that respect. I was doing it just as a way of earning a bit of money because, you know, YouTube does not pay any money. And I was spending 2 days a week not working just so I could make beautiful videos. And after a certain amount of time, that gets a little bit... It puts a lot of stress on one's financial situation. So, yeah. We've had a busy summer and I'm back to making videos now. So yeah, over the next few months, I'm going to sort of up the amount of content that I'm putting out, try and teach people about more mushrooms. One thing that people are really interested at this time of year is how to make acorns safe to eat. I get like one request a week on how to do it. So I'm going to be doing a video on that in the next couple of weeks because I found a new technique that I haven't found written down anywhere else in the foraging literature. I came to it, it's a scientific paper that I found, and I'm going to give it a go. I've never done it before, but I'm going to give it a go and see if I can make edible acorns in a different process in about half the time I think it takes. Actually, no, not even half the time. It's about 1/10 of the time to leach the tannins out. So you'll have to stay tuned for that.
Yeah, I'm actually genuinely, I'm looking forward to that. And I think at risk of, like, I could sit here and ask you 100 more questions, but I'm going to finish
I'll
up.
come back, don't worry.
Definitely.
I love doing this sort of stuff.
100%.
I've never done a podcast before. This is my first sort of podcast with someone else. So, yeah, I would happily carry on doing this stuff. I feel like we got a lot to talk about.
Because, I mean, I feel like for each topic that you've covered so far, we've nearly got an episode there. But
yeah. Okay, in the future, we'll do a thing. Maybe we'll do like a 3-parter or something at some point, and we can sit down. We'll get snacks and we'll, it'll all be good.
the whole 9 yards. I'd be more than happy.
Yeah, man.
But we'll finish up this one with the question that I ask everybody on the podcast. So it's a pretty simple question. You can be as detailed or as broad as you want. But what is your favorite place at the moment in nature? Hard one.
Yeah, that's very difficult. I think my favourite place is the patch of beach that I stand on when the tide comes in, because you can't be there forever. And I think there's a lesson in there somewhere about transience. And I don't know, I was thinking about it the other day. I was stood watching the waves sort of gather pace as a storm came in, and I was worrying about the little boat that I keep down at the fishing harbour that we've got here in the village. And I was really worrying about it so much that I'd sort of worried myself into a stupor. And I stood there until the water started lapping against my boots. And I realised I couldn't stay there forever, and that even the worry that I was feeling was only a transient thing. So that's my favourite place. I don't know, maybe that's a little bit too philosophical, but I've been thinking about it a lot recently.
What a lovely answer, man. Just to finish it out, we've mentioned it a couple of times, but do you want to give a shout out to your different social medias and everything that you've got going on?
Yeah, sure. The business end of things. So I am Fieldstudy on YouTube. That is where I do most of my stuff. So all my long form identification videos and stuff goes up on there. But you can also reach me on Instagram at Instagram_. No, that's wrong. You can also reach me on Instagram at Fieldstudy_. And yeah, I put stuff from just my daily life, my everyday foraging practices, some of the funny stuff. And if you message me on there, if you've got a question or want to send some pictures of something that you're trying to identify, then I'll sort of get back to you on that platform. So yeah, you can reach me on Instagram or YouTube, and yeah, come join the fun.
Thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciate it.
It has been a pleasure. Thank you.
This is the longest distance Feet on the Soil podcast so far. So you've claimed that space. Thank you for listening, everybody, and try and get outside today.